2008, the United Nations reported that for the first time in human history, more than half of the global human population lived within urban areas, and this statistic continues to grow exponentially. Currently, there is no true global consensus on what makes a landscape urban, though definitions tend to include attributes such as density of residents, diversity of cultures, amount of impervious surface, and industry presence. These human-centric factors have led many to see urban systems primarily as human habitat, but this is far from the truth. Cities are in fact habitat for wildlife that are dependent, exploitative, and tolerant of urban land cover, though fragmentation due to urbanization has caused declines in overall species richness and diversity. To combat this loss of wildlife species, urban landscapes must maintain and retain habitat connectivity within the urban matrix. It is estimated that the United States has a 1% annual rate of increase in urban populations, which can be attributed to outward urban expansion. The continuous growth and alteration of the urban landscape leads to habitat fragmentation, especially resulting from roads and building construction. The effects of fragmentation may be difficult to see on the ground. However, when we take a higher vantage point and look at the changes on an urban landscape over the course of 20 years, it paints a much clearer image of just how fast we are losing habitat connectivity within urban landscapes. Habitat connectivity refers to a landscape's ability to facilitate or impede animal movement and other ecological processes, depending on what degree distinct patches of habitat are connected. Connectivity can influence the distribution, genetic diversity, and health of both plant and animal populations. To get a better idea of how human disturbances associated with urbanization impact habitat connectivity, let's take a look at an urban landscape that may be familiar to some of you. Within this landscape, what are the barriers to connectivity of the urban matrix? Possibly the densely packed downtown area, large roads, railways, sparse canopy cover, limited open space, and built structures. Would you consider this urban landscape to have high or low connectivity? To answer this question, we need to understand that within urban landscapes, habitat connectivity is influenced by 4 key factors: patch size, shape, proximity, and quantity. When it comes to size and shape, the larger patches typically harbor more species because there are more niches, including interior areas away from adjacent development. For example, bobcats are more likely to be present in large patches of open space than in smaller patches. Larger patches are inherently more connected because they provide larger areas of continuous habitat. Smaller patches contain fewer species and may harbor only individuals of species more tolerant of urban development, especially if isolated from other patches. Another essential component of connectivity is the proximity of habitat patches to one another and their quantity within a landscape. As the distance between patches increases, it is more difficult for animal movement to occur between patches. Additionally, increasing the number of patches within a landscape in close proximity to one another will make the landscape more permeable to movement and therefore more connected, because animals have more habitat to use as they move. Looking back at this specific landscape, we can now say this urban site has low connectivity. This is due to the quantity of barriers within the landscape, such as heavily trafficked roads, the lack of habitat patches, with most of the land cover being mowed sports fields, and the size of patches being relatively small and isolated. Now, take a look at this map displaying green spaces within an urban landscape. Does this landscape have high or low connectivity? If you answered high, then we are on the right track. Here, we see habitat patches connected by corridors. Corridors are linear strips of habitat used as interconnecting links between habitat patches. These corridor networks reduce patch isolation and can be structured as either long, connected strips as seen on the left of this map, or as small individual stepping stones as seen on the right side of the map. The structuring of corridors will depend upon management goals, land availability, and the mobility of the species you are trying to conserve within the landscape. Less mobile species, such as salamanders, need greater connectivity than species that are able to move more easily, such as songbirds. Connectivity can be enhanced at multiple scales. In areas where roads are persistent barriers to movement, local and state governments can build underpasses and overpasses that function as wildlife corridors. An example of this is the Wallace-Annenberg Wildlife Crossing in Southern California. This overpass will be completed in 2025 and is reported to be the largest in the world, spanning 10 highway lanes. These crossings use fences to funnel animals and are usually surrounded by vegetation to attract wildlife, though in more densely populated areas where habitat is already highly fragmented, this may not be possible. At smaller scales, individual landowners can improve connectivity by managing their yards for wildlife habitat, increasing the structural complexity of vegetation, fostering native plants, and avoiding plantings that are widely spaced are all strategies to provide high-quality habitat that improve landscape connectivity. Instead of having a yard that looks like this, shoot for something like this. If many landowners in a neighborhood cooperate to create habitat in each of their yards, then the comprehensive contribution adds up to yield a more connected landscape. Whether through the addition or manipulation of habitat patches, the construction of corridors, or the management practices of individual landowners, connection is key to conserving the greatest number of wildlife species in an urbanizing landscape. As the human population grows and land use changes rapidly, wildlife managers, landowners, and urban planners must work together, finding creative strategies to provide wildlife a more connected urban landscape.